The lock was still on the gate when Walter Pruitt arrived that morning. Not his lock. Keys had been cut off sometime before dawn, replaced with a heavy steel padlock he had never seen before. The kind that comes with paperwork and legal language and the particular coldness of an institution that has decided a matter is closed. A notice was stapled to the wooden post beside it. White paper, black ink, the bank's letterhead at the top. Walter read it once, without touching it. Then he read it again. Sealed by order of First Meridian Bank. Property under active foreclosure proceedings. Unauthorized entry prohibited. He stood at that gate for a long time. The sun was coming up behind him, spreading low across the fields he had worked for 38 years. 240 acres of central Missouri farmland that had been in his family since 1952. The same land his father had cleared. The same soil his grandfather had first broken with a borrowed mule and a determination that Walter had inherited along with the deed. He was 77 years old. He had never missed a mortgage payment in his life. Not once. Not in 38 years. He looked at the lock, then at the notice, then at the fields beyond the gate, the ones that were supposed to be his. The ones that still felt like his in the way that things feel like yours when you have poured your life into them for longer than most people hold any single thing. Then he did something the bank did not expect. He did not call his son. He did not call a lawyer. He did not stand at that gate and argue with the notice stapled to the post. He went home. He made coffee. He sat down at the kitchen table and opened the bottom drawer of the old oak desk his father had built by hand in 1961. And he started reading. 3 weeks later, First Meridian Bank's senior legal counsel sat in a federal courtroom in Kansas City and heard 4 words from a judge that would take the bank 18 months and 3 separate regulatory investigations to recover from. You sealed the wrong farm. Walter Pruitt had been farming that land since he was 39 years old. He had not inherited it easily. His father, George Pruitt, had farmed 2 properties across his lifetime. The first, a smaller parcel in Saline County, he had sold in 1974 to pay off a debt that had grown past managing. The second, the 240 acres in Cooper County, he had held on to with the particular stubbornness of a man who understood that some losses cannot be recovered. When George died in 1985, he left Walter the Cooper County land and a mortgage that had 14 years remaining on it. He also left him a letter. Walter had read that letter so many times over the years that he no longer needed to unfold it to remember what it said. His father had written it by hand, 3 pages, precise and unhurried, the way George Pruitt did everything. The first 2 pages were practical. Instructions about the land, the soil, the equipment, the relationships with neighboring farmers that needed to be maintained. The 3rd page was something else. It began with a single sentence. The bank will come for this land eventually. They always do. When they come, open the drawer. Walter had read that sentence in 1985 and not fully understood it. He had read it again in 1993 when First Meridian first restructured his loan terms without adequate notice. He had read it again in 2001 when the bank changed ownership and a new branch manager had sent him a letter about a payment discrepancy that turned out to be the bank's own accounting error. Each time he had opened the drawer, each time he had found what he needed. Because George Pruitt had not just left his son a letter, he had left him 40 years of documentation, every payment receipt going back to 1952, every letter the bank had ever sent the family, every property tax record, every assessment notice, every correspondence with the county, the state, and 3 different lending institutions across 4 decades of farming. The drawer was not a drawer. It was an archive. And Walter had added to it every year since 1985. Same meticulous system his father had built. Same careful attention to every piece of paper that crossed the threshold of that farmhouse. By 2024, the drawer contained 72 years of unbroken documentation. Not a single payment missing. Not a single letter unaccounted for. Walter Pruitt had never thrown away a piece of paper in his life. First Meridian Bank had been through 3 ownership changes in 15 years. Each change had brought new systems, new management, new processes for handling legacy accounts. And with each change, something had been lost in the translation between the old way of doing things and the new one. In Walter Pruitt's case, what had been lost was significant. In 2019, when First Meridian was acquired by a regional holding company called Central Valley Financial Group, the loan servicing portfolios of both institutions were merged into a single system. The process took 11 months and involved the transfer of over 40,000 individual accounts. Walter's account was among them. What did not transfer correctly was the payment history prior to 2009. The new system showed the account opening date, the original loan terms, and 10 years of payment records. Everything before 2009 showed as unverified legacy data, flagged for review but never actually reviewed, sitting in a digital waiting room that no one at the newly merged institution had the time or the mandate to clear. In 2023, a newly hired compliance officer named Andrew Voss ran an automated audit of all flagged legacy accounts. The audit was designed to identify potential risk. When it reached Walter's account, it found what the system had been showing for 4 years: an incomplete payment history, a loan balance that, according to the system, had not been fully serviced. Voss escalated the finding. His supervisor escalated it further. By the time it reached the desk of First Meridian's senior acquisitions manager, a man named Douglas Hearn, it had been transformed from a data migration error into an actionable foreclosure case. Douglas Hearn was 44 years old. He had been in bank acquisitions for 16 years. He had a process and he followed it. He did not call Walter Pruitt. He did not send a letter asking for clarification. He did not review the original paper records that existed in storage from the PRE 2009 period. He filed the foreclosure. He ordered the property sealed. And on a Tuesday morning in March, a man Walter had never seen before came to his gate before sunrise and replaced his lock with one that belonged to the bank. Douglas Hearn had never heard the name George Pruitt. He had never seen the oak desk in the farmhouse kitchen. He had never opened the bottom drawer. The lawyer. Name was Francis Doyle. He was 64 years old, Independence, Missouri, 39 years of banking and property law. A man who had spent 4 decades watching financial institutions make the particular kind of mistake that came from trusting a system more than a document. Walter drove to his office the morning after the lock appeared on his gate. He did not bring the drawer. He brought what he needed from it, organized into a single folder the way his father had taught him. The original 1952 deed, the complete mortgage agreement from 1985, every payment receipt from 1985 to 2024, 346 receipts, not one missing, the restructuring notice from 1993 and his father's written response, the 2001 correspondence about the payment discrepancy, the bank's own letter confirming that discrepancy had been resolved in Walter's favor, and at the bottom of the folder, one document Francis Doyle had not expected to see: a letter from First Meridian Bank dated September 2009, signed by the branch manager at the time, confirming that the Pruitt account was in good standing, all payments current, and the estimated payoff date was March 2017. Francis looked at that letter for a long time. Then he looked at Walter. "Your loan should have been paid off 7 years ago." Walter said, "I paid the last payment in February 2017. I have the receipt." Francis turned to the folder and found it. February 14th, 2017. Final payment, account balance 0. He set it down. "Mr. Pruitt, your mortgage has been paid off for 7 years. First Meridian Bank sealed a property on which they hold no active mortgage claim." Walter said nothing. Francis picked up his pen. "What they did is not foreclosure. You cannot foreclose on a paid-off loan." He paused. "What they did is unlawful seizure of private property, and that is a significantly different matter." He looked at the folder again. "How long has your family maintained these records?" Walter said, "Since 1952. Francis looked up. 72 years. Walter said, "My father started it. I kept it going." Francis sat back in his chair and looked at the folder on his desk for a long moment. Then he said, "I want you to go home and bring me the entire drawer." It took Francis Doyle 4 days to go through everything. He worked through it the way Walter's father had built it, chronologically, methodically, 1 year at a time. By the end of the first day, he had confirmed the complete payment history from 1985 to 2024. By the end of the second, he had traced the exact point where First Meridian System had lost the PRE 2009 data during the 2019 merger. By the end of the third, he had identified three separate regulatory violations in the bank's foreclosure procedure, including the failure to conduct mandatory review of original paper records before initiating proceedings. On the fourth day, he calculated the damages: unlawful seizure of private property, loss of access to farmland during active growing season, emotional distress, regulatory violations, attorney's fees, and one additional element that Walter had mentioned during their second meeting, quietly, the way he mentioned most things. The bank seal on the gate had been seen by every neighboring farmer within 5 miles. In a community where reputation was currency, the sight of a foreclosure notice on Walter Pruitt's gate had done something that no court filing could easily quantify. People had talked. Francis added reputational damages to the list. When he finished the calculation, he called Walter and read him the number. Walter sat with it for a moment. Then he said, "That's not why I'm doing this." Francis said, "I know, but it's what they owe you." Walter said, "I want the lock off my gate." Francis said, "That too." He filed the complaint on a Friday morning. It was 53 pages long. He filed it in federal court in Kansas City, simultaneously with the Missouri Division of Finance and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. 3 separate filings. Every document from the drawer attached. 72 years of paper proof that First Meridian Bank had sealed a farm it had no legal claim to touch. Douglas Hearn received the filings on a Monday morning. He read the first page. Then he called his supervisor. His supervisor called legal. Legal called the senior partner. The senior partner read the 2009 letter confirming the Pruitt account was in good standing. Then she found the February 2017 final payment receipt. Then she sat at her desk for a long time without saying anything to anyone. Then she picked up the phone and called Francis Doyle's office. Francis was not available. She left a message. Francis called back 3 days later. The hearing was held on a Thursday morning in federal court in Kansas City. The courtroom had the particular atmosphere of a place where significant things had been decided for a long time. High ceilings, wood-paneled walls, the kind of silence that made every sound feel deliberate. First Meridian Bank arrived with 5 lawyers. The senior partner, a woman named Catherine Price, led the team. She was 52 years old, 24 years of banking litigation, a track record that had made her the institution's first call whenever something serious needed to be handled. She had reviewed every document in the case personally. She knew exactly what the drawer contained. She had spent 2 weeks trying to find a way around it. She had not found one. Walter arrived with Francis Doyle and the drawer. Not a copy, not a selection. The entire drawer carried in a flat archival box. 72 years of documentation sitting on the plaintiff's table in a federal courtroom in Kansas City. Judge Margaret Yates had been on the federal bench for 21 years. She had read every page of the filing the weekend before the hearing. When she entered the courtroom and saw the archival box on the plaintiff's table, she looked at it for a moment before sitting down. Catherine Price spoke first. She was skilled and she was thorough, and she did the best she could with what she had. She argued the foreclosure had been initiated in good faith based on available system data. She argued the data migration during the 2019 merger had created a genuine ambiguity in the account history. She argued the bank had followed standard procedure for flagged legacy accounts. She spoke for 28 minutes. Then Judge Yates turned to Francis Doyle. Francis stood. He adjusted his glasses. Then he placed 3 documents on the bench: the February 2017 final payment receipt, the September 2009 letter from First Meridian confirming the account in good standing, and a single-page calculation showing that as of the date of the foreclosure filing, Walter Pruitt's mortgage had been paid in full for 7 years and 1 month. Then he said 6 words. The loan was paid off, completely. He sat back down. Judge Yates looked at the 3 documents. She looked at them for a long time. Then she looked at the archival box on the plaintiff's table. Then she looked at Catherine Price. "Counselor, your client initiated foreclosure proceedings on a property for which no active mortgage existed." Price said, "Your Honor, the system data indicated standard procedure for flagged legacy accounts," Judge Yates said, "includes mandatory review of original paper records before any foreclosure action is initiated." "Did your client conduct that review?" A pause. "The paper records were in storage from the pre-merger period and had not been. Did your client conduct that review?" Price was quiet for a moment. "No, Your Honor." Judge Yates looked back at the documents. Your client sealed the farm, on which they held no mortgage, without reviewing the original records that would have immediately revealed that fact. Another pause, and those records were in their own possession. The courtroom was completely silent. Then Judge Yates looked past Catherine Price directly at Douglas Hearn, who was sitting at the bank's table in the particular stillness of a man who understood that everything that was happening was a direct consequence of a decision he had made. She said, "Mr. Hearn." He looked up. "You ordered this foreclosure," he said. "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you review the original paper records before doing so?" A long pause. "No, Your Honor." Judge Yates looked at him for a moment longer. Then she looked back at her papers. "The foreclosure action against the Pruitt property is dismissed with prejudice. First Meridian Bank is ordered to remove the seal from the property immediately, within 24 hours of this ruling. The plaintiff is awarded damages in the amount of $412,000, including reputational damages, loss of seasonal farming access, regulatory violation penalties, and full legal costs." She picked up her pen. "Furthermore, this court is referring First Meridian Bank's merger data migration procedures and legacy account review protocols to the Missouri Division of Finance and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for formal investigation." She set her pen down. "You sealed the wrong farm." No one at the bank's table moved. Walter gave one quiet nod. The same nod his father had given when something had been decided and didn't. "Do you need any more words?" The lock was off the gate by noon the following day. A bank representative Walter had never seen before came with a key and a bolt cutter and removed it without making eye contact. He left without saying anything. Walter stood at the gate after the man drove away and looked at the post where the notice had been stapled. The staple holes were still there. Small marks in the old wood that would be there for a while. He looked at them for a moment. Then he opened the gate and walked into his fields. First Meridian Bank paid the judgment in full within 30 days. $412,000. After Francis Doyle's fees, it was more money than Walter had ever seen from a single source. More than any harvest, any equipment sale, any year the land had given back more than expected. But that was not what stayed with him. The Missouri Division of Finance completed its preliminary review 6 weeks after the ruling. They found that First Meridian's legacy account review protocol had not been followed in 31 other cases during the 2019 merger period. 14 of those cases had resulted in collection actions. 7 had resulted in foreclosure filings. 3 families had already lost their land. Those 3 cases were reopened. Because Walter Pruitt had kept a drawer? Because George Pruitt had started filling it in 1952 and had written a letter to his son in 1985 that began with one sentence: "The bank will come for this land eventually. They always do. When they come, open the drawer." Douglas Hearn left First Meridian Bank 2 weeks after the ruling. Andrew Voss, the compliance officer whose automated audit had started the chain of events, was reassigned. Catherine Price returned to her office and did not take another First Meridian case. Walter drove home from Kansas City alone, same highway he had driven his whole life. Same flat Missouri landscape on either side, the fields brown and quiet in the early spring, waiting for the season to begin the way they always waited, patient and indifferent to everything that happened above them. He turned down the county road, past the neighbors' farms, past the grain elevator that had been there since before he was born, turned onto his own gravel drive and parked in front of the farmhouse. He sat in the truck for a while. Then he carried the archival box inside and set it on the kitchen table. He took the drawer out of the box and placed it back in the oak desk his father had built by hand in 1961. Then he opened the folder marked 2024 and placed the judgment letter at the front, behind 72 years of paper, behind 346 payment receipts, behind a September 2009 letter and a February 2017 receipt, and a lifetime of documents that his father had started keeping before Walter was old enough to understand why. He closed the drawer. Then he walked out the back door, past the equipment shed, past the fence line his grandfather had built with borrowed tools in 1952, past the creek that ran along the south edge of the property, to the old oak tree at the far corner of the land where George Pruitt was buried beneath a stone that said nothing except his name and the years he had lived. Walter stood there in the early spring wind. The fields around him were quiet. The gate at the end of the drive was open. The lock the bank had put there was gone. He looked at the stone for a long time. Then he said the only words that mattered. I opened the drawer, Dad. A long silence. Just the wind across the fields his grandfather had broken and his father had held, and he had kept for 38 years against everything that had tried to take them, just like you told me. Some men leave land, some leave money. Some leave instructions in a letter that begins with a single sentence and turns out to be the most valuable thing they ever wrote. George Pruitt left all three. But what Walter remembered, standing at that oak tree in the early spring wind, was not the land or the money, or even the letter. It was the drawer, and the 72 years of paper inside it, and a father who had understood, long before anyone came to test it, that the difference between keeping your land and losing it was not luck, not lawyers, not money. It was paper. Every receipt, every letter, every document from beginning to end. Keep everything, trust nothing. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. Hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. We will see you tomorrow.